took on a whole life of its own. And secrecy. I think that's another question for people to ask. Are you talking to people about this or are you being secretive about it?
Mhm. Well, and I'll just say a lot of the clients I have who have self-identified as sex addicts as we go along have said that when they were sexually exploring, which when we talk about it, it was normal, that they were shamed by
Yeah.
mom, shamed by dad, that there was a big shame component. And then they said, oh, well, I still want to explore this part of me, but I'm not going to let anybody know. I'm going to do it in, like this, Tim, what you said, in secret. And that's, I think, very dangerous when that happens.
Yeah.
And there are certain cultures where even normal sexual exploration is not okay.
Yeah.
I want to get back to the how do I know if there's a
Yeah.
problem
Sure.
piece. And so I know we're going to start wrapping up here, but the list I've got so far is have others been impacted by your sexual behavior? Are you using them as a coping skill? The sexual, using sexual behavior as a coping skill. Is there an on-off pattern? Can you go without for 100 days, for example? Early exposure to some kind of sexual behavior that maybe before you were really ready for, and then some element of secrecy.
Well, hold on.
Yep.
I don't think it's just the early exposure, but it's the early exposure. And very quickly, there was this sort of sense of, I am way more interested in this than my friends are.
I don't want to put that as a blanket statement for all
No,
addicts, though,
not as a blanket statement,
but for
but
some,
for people, if that's their experience, it's something
yeah.
to look at.
Yeah, yeah, there are some folks who had early exposure and absolutely did not have an interest. But you're right, there are some folks who have early exposure and do have an interest. So check that for yourself. And then the other piece I wanted to bring forward is the continuation despite consequences
Oh
piece.
yeah.
Somebody has said, or you've harmed yourself via masturbation, for example, or objects, and yet you still continue to do that. If there's a really compulsive problem here, someone says they're going to divorce me, they're going to leave me, I've injured myself. I don't like that I do this, so I'm
I've
going to
gotten a,
stop.
I've gotten a warning at work because of the pornography on my computer.
And yet the person still goes back. That to me is one of the hallmarks of there's a problem here.
You know,
Continuation despite consequences.
there's a parallel to that. I think sometimes people in pre-awareness, if they look at it, will spot, which is risk taking. You know, looking at porn in their office at work, masturbating in places where they might get caught, acting out in places where there's a certain risk of discovery coming about, feeling like the behavior and the situations in which they're engaging in it keep getting pushed. Those boundaries keep getting pushed.
I
So is
mean, you're
there a,
talking about the growing of a tolerance and escalation of behavior.
yeah, the escalation of the behavior
Okay.
and sort of the willingness to take risks. And sometimes there's this awareness of the risk, and sometimes there's a denial and a downplaying of the risk, but
Yeah.
there's definitely a risk of some sort, even if it's
Oh,
just a risk of I don't mean to say it that way, but
right, right.
even if it's a risk of discovery versus a risk of significant legal or relational consequences.